Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is a frontline update for the 7th of November 2024. I haven't done one for many a day now because the US elections got unfortunately in the way. As a result, there will be some pretty substantial changes on the front line, no doubt. I haven't really looked at them in huge detail yet, so this is going to be somewhat stream of consciousness-y. I've got a few extra sources to help us along. Yeah, we'll come to that at the end. I'm gonna look at a George Barros thread about the freezing of the Russian Ukrainian lines. We'll look at that at the end of the video. For the time being, if you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the screen at the moment. Pause the video. Okay, we'll go up to the Kursk region up here, and you can see that there are no changes to the front line up there, and that means, considering this is a 3-4 day update, something like that, that's quite significant. So yeah, a bit of stasis there, or a lack of information coming out from both sides. There are claims, Zelensky I think has claimed that there are North Korean casualties, that the North Koreans have lost troops up in the Kursk area, so that is something to consider. Kriegsforscher here says the Russian counteroffensive in Kursk area has started. As I said before, they expect to liberate their territory in 2 to 3 months. Let's see whether it's a realistic objective. The Ukrainians expected the Russians to launch an offensive 2 days ago on the 5th of November. A couple of days ago, they had a rotation, and the 51st Regiment changed to the 137th Regiment, their VDV, so that's their paratroopers, their crack forces. A couple of days ago, 810th Marine Brigade, so Naval Infantry Brigade Marines, received 40 new BTR-82As. Wow. And remember that what I wrote before about reinforcement of 5,500 soldiers on the left flank. So today the 51st and 83rd VDV Brigades launched an attack at the left flank together with 810th Marine Brigade at the north. Using bad weather conditions, fog and wind, they attacked with the help of armoured fighting vehicles. 51st Regiment used 7 buggies, 5 BMP-3s and 2 BMD-2s. All the buggies stayed in the field. 2 BMD-2s and 1 BMP-3 were destroyed. Another 4 BMP-3 were damaged and abandoned. We'll try to finish them. 83rd VDV Brigade used a couple of BMP-3s in the T-80 BVM, so that's a tank. Tank was destroyed and 1 BMP-3 is damaged and abandoned. 810th Marine Brigade used today at least 14 BTR-82As. 10 of them were destroyed or damaged and abandoned. As I said before, the left flank and the centre will be the hardest places in Kursk Oblast. I think you will see photos of the destroyed AFV soon. By the way, it's funny how for one night 400 people decided to unfollow this page. It's definitely not about numbers, but it's just funny about how X moderates Ukrainian accounts. I have reported on that earlier, just there's nothing to do with the frontline update, but there are lots of bots that have been cleared out from the Russians. So lots of Russian bots have disappeared all of a sudden from Twitter, as far as I understand, now that the US elections have been and gone, and that tells you quite a bit. So lots of fighting going on up here in the north and along the western flank, the left flank there. So that's where the Russians are going to be working hard. They have 40 new BTRs for their 810th Marine Naval Infantry Brigade, and the others using quite a lot of equipment as well. We have seen some videos of equipment losses. I showed you one today that had 5 BTRs taken out pretty much in the same place, and 3 others just off camera in the next field. So then when we go to the north in the Kharkiv Oblast, some really good news for the Ukrainians there. I mean, the rest is fairly bad news if you look at the map. Other than a couple of random sort of spots, it's all Russian advances. But in the north, certainly looking better. And this is because the Kharkiv region was the one main area where the Russians had to take troops in order to support the Kursk Oblast offensive. So we have some success in the Klyubky area. This is directly north of Kharkiv, with the Russians being pushed back in a place adjacent to the reservoir there. So Grayskull talks about this. Pro-Ukrainian channel reports the Ukrainian advance west of Klyubky. It's also risks cutting the town's MSR main supply route to the north, although similar SSRs exist further east. MSR main supply route, that is more of a British term. Americans use GLOC, ground lines of communication, as far as I understand it. So there you go. The Ukrainians pushing back in that area north of Lipsy. Then when we come to the east, we can see that in the Staretsia area of the Kharkiv Oblast, the Ukrainians have been pushing the Russians back there. That's according to Syriac maps. And then further to the east, inside Vovchansk itself. First thing to note is that middle area where Syriac maps said that the Russians had lost control of the aggregates plant. Then sometime later they said they had it back again. Now they've lost it, but there's a few gains further north of there and a few losses for the Russians also further north. So it's all happening in the Vovchansk area. Bandera fella here says Ukrainian forces have successfully reclaimed 2 high-rise buildings in central Vovchansk. Step by step, they're dismantling enemy positions, regaining critical vantage points. So that is just north of here. That's in this area, claiming that they have made those gains. So if we see, you've got that square, that park there, and you have one block just to the north, and then it's just further north of there. So that is here being cleared out, and there's a kind of acceptance of some gains for the Ukrainians, as according to Syriac maps, just a minor change there. But yeah, certainly that aggregates plant now under or not under Russian control. The Ukrainians have reported advance further in Vovchansk, and that's exactly that same area we were talking about. That's from a different source, Grayskull. And then another source saying that Ukrainians have advanced in Vovchansk as well, in pretty much that same area, but a little bit also to the south here, that the Ukrainians are advancing in that direction, which is precisely where Syriac map says the Russians have made some gains, although these gains will be over maybe 3 to 4 days. So it's difficult, two things might have happened. Russians made advances, then Ukrainians made advances back. Who knows? So then when we come further to the northeast, we have nearer the border, Russians not in control of a certain area just at the edge of their bridgehead. That could be a readjustment as opposed to any counterattack from the Ukrainians though. Then we come down to Kupiansk, no change to that northern area from Kupiansk to past Klyubky and south of Vilshana and Persho-Travnevi there. That's good news. We come down to the Pischany sector, and the Russians have made some small advances according to Syriac maps, getting closer to the Oskil River, further to north of where they already are at the Oskil River. Andrew Perpetua has them advancing a fair amount, but that's within what Syriac maps had already claimed. But yeah, so approaching more of an agreement there, should we say. But actually, considering I haven't done this update for some days, it's not all that bad. And likewise, all the way down further south towards the Serebiansky forest, some small gains in the Terney settlement just to the northern parts of Terney there. They are looking like they are making these slow advances to try and take Terney, Yampolivka and all that area to the east of these reservoirs as they come down towards Zaporizhzhia and Torsk. Then when we come past the Serebiansky forest, I don't know where we got this. This is, Kramina area. So some footage here from NOL reports had quite a bit of equipment being taken out by the Ukrainians. Russia's trying to advance in the Kramina area here. Fighters from the 3rd Border Detachment, Pomster, have eliminated 15 Russians and wounded 13 more. They have destroyed 1 tank, 2 howitzers, 5 military trucks, 8 enemy vehicles, a fuel tanker, a fuel and lubricant depot, several field ammo depots, and a mortar position. Lots of destruction there for Russian forces in the Kramina area. I don't know exactly where that is. I don't think there's a geolocation underneath. No, it's fairly recent. So that's going to be somewhere in this general vicinity. It may be around where the Russians attacking. Ukraine is trying to hit them with drone activity there. Now, as we come further down south past the Sversk sector, this is slightly worrying for the Ukrainians. Sversk is key, right? It is all interlocks, doesn't it? It's an interlocking jigsaw where This forest area helps to give defense to Sversk, so the Russians are going to struggle to get across the river there unless they control all of that forest area, and then it's still pretty difficult. So, they need to get there probably through Bilahorivka, but that's really difficult. And then this is essentially where they were attacking through, or trying to attack through, for so long. But you've got these big hill, so almost mountainous kind of areas there that overlook the chalk open cast mine there, and the Russians have struggled to get through Bilahorivka, as the sighting down from here allows the Ukrainians to hold on to that quite a bit, and there's this very steep incline from the river up to those hills over here, so it's very difficult for the Russians to move across there, the Seversky Donetsk River. So they thought, right, okay, we'll try it from the south, and they started moving up the railway line from here up towards Vyimka, which they appear to have now taken, as according to Syriac maps. So that is some significant gain that has taken place over time. We've got some smaller gains according to Andriy Perpetua up that tree line there, and this, I'd say, field, but it's probably it's fairly undulating, this area, quite craggy and undulating, not so much undulating, that's probably the wrong word, but yeah, according to Syriac maps, some fairly wide-scale Russian gains there, including, again, back into control of Ivana Darivka there. You've got this ledge above it, higher ground here, which looks like it's holding out, and that's really, really important. I think there's quite a few defences around here. This is essentially where you would be defending Sversk. So it looks like the Russians are putting on some pressure to try and take Sversk, and that is definitely an issue. I mean, it's a bit of a logistics hub there. It's not a great place to live. I remember we were going to visit Sversk when I was out there, and we couldn't get passes because even then it was really, really dodgy. And that was back in February. Well, it'll be even worse now. So Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, Druzhkivka, Konstantinivka, I think they're all kind of part of this. I'd add that onto Sversk in this big semicircle, and I think that's worrying that the Russians are pushing closer and closer to there. Then when we come down to Bakhmut, to Cheziv Yar, we can see some small gains over the last few days for the Russians just to the east of Stubochki along this T0504 highway that goes through Konstantinivka there. That is worrying, but actually not too much success for the Russians going through Cheziv Yar. And there's still this really big difference in Russian control lines, as according to Andriy Perpetua here and Syriac maps. It exists also very much where we were just talking about with the Russian gains, down around here, around Klyubky. There's still some massive disagreements between the mappers there. And then we come to New York and Toretsk. So this is more north of Toretsk, around a place called Druzhba. If you remember, Mayorsk back here is a railway junction. It splits going north there and westerly here. The Ukrainians were fighting over the canal, and down around here they had some success taking a little bit back at one point, but now that's obviously when the Russians attacked into Turska, they took all of this area, went through here, but also trying to advance along the railway line here through Druzhba. Now, Syriac maps indicates that the Russians have been pushed back a little bit in Druzhba, north of the railway line, but have taken some, I don't even know, no, those are probably incorrect pins. As you can see, if they're on the line, sometimes the automation picks up on some movements and stuff that don't actually signify territorial exchange here. So that could be good news that really that's about the Ukrainian gains in that area. No change in the middle of Toretsk and New York. This is significant. Possibly signs of stabilization there. That would be good news, wouldn't it? Then when we come down to the Prokrosk front line, again, no change along here. And the reason that's the case, because this is the main Ukrainian defensive line. If you get the Russians making gains around here, then that means that line's been broken and it's, Prokrosk is on the chopping block. So that's good news that there's no change there, but also unsurprising to some degree. And I don't think that's the case further down to the south, where I don't know where the trench lines exactly are there. No change on that northern stretch though, so good news for the Ukrainians there. Ukrainians pushing back the Russians a wee bit, just taking back a sort of part of a road here and maybe tree line in this area north of Seledove, but the Russians making some gains north of there as well, and also very much to the west. Andrew Perpetua a lot more conservative, having the Russians only gaining a smaller amount up to these blue lines there, but Serebiansky having quite a bit of gain for the Russians towards Protrivka, which is on the way towards Prokrosk. Definitely up there, definitely moving to the west, south of Prokrosk, as they're probably trying to take the weakest area with the least defended, the least fortified areas as much as they can before the winter and before potential forced negotiations. That could be something that they are considering, but certainly trying to make hay while the sun shines and taking quite a few fields according to Surrey maps, going down further to the south around Novooleksivka and on towards Novomitrivka there as well. Okay, then as you can see, some fairly significant gains around Kharkiv to the north. It's all kind of been filled in according to Andrew Perpetua, and Surrey maps has shown that the Russians have moved further in towards and into Ilyinka as well. We know there's quite a bit of fighting going on in that area, so both mappers agreeing a lot more with what's happening here. The Russians are having some success, certainly to the north of Kharkiv, north of the reservoir there. And then most of the rest of the gains concern what's going on around Vuhledar. I'd say Vuhledar, but that's a long way in the past now. Vuhledar, that's all the way down there in Pavlivka. I mean, goodness me, this is what we talked about for an awful long time, over a year. The Russians beating their head against that brick wall, and then suddenly you can see all of this area, that capitulation of the Ukrainian forces there. Absolutely incredible. So the Russians still pushing on along the entirety of this front, really. There's not too much to say about individual places other than both the mappers agreeing there's at least some gains for the Russians. Those for Suret map are much more extensive, making huge gains north of Novoukrainka, around Yasna Polyana and Maximivka there. That seems to be fully under Russian control, as according to Suret map. So yeah, Zolota Niva as well, coming at Velika Novosilka, interestingly, from the east. So remember, this was the area where the Russians had attacked. In fact, I can't. Can I show it? Yes, I can on this. Because I'm doing it in Google Maps now, or not Google Earth. Where are the lines? Russian fortifications. We should have these. Why are they not there? No, not Russian fortifications. It's going to be under rigs and more. No, is it under DSM? Where have my additional pre-February? I should have. Why are they not there? Anyway, it's not there anymore. I don't know why that is. Maybe because they've just been completely taken now. We did have the white lines for the pre-May 2023 positions for the Ukrainians that they took back, and this area here is the area, the Velika Novosilka area, where the Ukrainians took. Well, actually, they took it all the way down to Staromilnivka there, around here. And just past Regina, and then it got pushed back, and the Russians had taken back this amount of land. But generally, this area was what the Russians ceded to the Ukrainians in that counteroffensive, and now the Russians are taking it back from the east, which is interesting. So Velika Novosilka, which is a fairly substantial settlement, it is coming under increasing pressure from the Russians as they're getting closer and closer. They'll be hammering that with artillery, no doubt. And sadly, some gains for the Russians in the Robotyne area. Andrew Perpetua having them take a couple of fields to the east of that sector, and Suret Maps has them gaining some to the west of that sector. So that is the situation around Robotyne as they're moving slowly there towards Kharkiv. But we haven't seen too much gain in that sector for quite a long time, to be honest. A couple of random pins that I haven't got rid of. Sorry about that. And up there in Bakhmut. But you get the picture. So that is a change to quite a lot of change, really, particularly to the south. Prokrosk has been... There is still a lot of Russian advancing in that area, but not as much as we were seeing. So I get a sense that, considering this is a 3 or 4 day update, that's actually a little bit slower than we had been seeing. Same can be said around Kharkiv. So that's itself good news. Cheziv still, it's slow for the Russians there. Sversk worries me a little bit. And Pischany, I'm not all that worried about this area for its own intrinsic kind of operational value. I'm just worried that whenever you lose territory, you've then got to take it back either militarily or through negotiations. So this will cost them in terms of any Russian gains, cost the Ukrainians in terms of negotiations. So the more I guess the more the Ukrainians can take back in Kharkiv, means they won't have to negotiate that. And if they can hold to Kursk, that's going to be a really important negotiating point for them if it comes to that. So talking about negotiations, I did mean to say down in the southern area. Interesting here that although this is November the 5th, so this is 2 days ago, according to Ukrainian military source, Lieutenant of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, call sign Alex, the Ukrainian advances have taken place at Shakhtarsk, northwest of Vuhledar. So actually, even though I talk about these large-scale Ukrainian advances, there was a counterattack, or at least that was the claim, around Shakhtarsk, which is here. So maybe Ukrainians pushed back there a little bit, or they could have pushed back and then been pushed out again by the Russians in a counter attack. He adds that securing these gains remains uncertain, and that's kind of the point. But that this local advance is crucial for improving operational positioning. So yeah. Now George Barros from the Institute for the Study of War. I keep saying George Boris because I went to school with George Boris, but there you go. The current lines are not a sense. He's a doctor now. Met me the other day. Current lines are not a sensible starting point for negotiations with Russia, even if Putin was serious about negotiating a ceasefire on these lines. Freezing the Russian war in Ukraine on anything like the current lines enormously advantages Russia and increases the risks and costs to Ukraine and the West of deterring, let alone defeating, a future Russian attempt to fulfill Putin's aims by force. A Ukraine strong enough to deter and defeat any future Russian aggression with an economy strong enough to prosper without large amounts of foreign aid is the only outcome of Russia's war that the United States and the West should accept. So there's no point freezing the lines and essentially leaving the Ukrainians hang them out to dry. If there's any negotiation that takes place and any kind of freezing and right, you have that, blah, 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 we need to make sure as allies of Ukraine, and I think that's suboptimal, I think it's absolutely horrible that we wouldn't facilitate Ukraine prevailing in this war. But if Trump does what Trump does and etc., whatever happens, Ukraine cannot be left out to dry, hung out to dry in terms of its economy and the support it gets. Because if it becomes this semi-functional society and economy and nation that is not being nurtured by the West and economically stabilized and the seeds of future growth aren't sown effectively and propagated, then Ukraine will just devolve into a bit of chaos and will be a ripe target for Russia to continue its war. And if it's not conventional war, it's kind of economic, political war. So Russia needs to be fundamentally weak as a result of negotiations and continued sanctions. But Ukraine needs to be left in a strong position with a military industrial base where they can continue to manufacture their own defense articles to help defend their remaining territory. Anyway, interesting that George Barros here is saying that it's not a sensible starting point for negotiations. It would be too early for that, and I'd absolutely agree. I think it's always too early. I think Russia should be made to give everything back But this is where it gets into the stages of realpolitik and what's actually practically possible in any given scenario. But I think it's all practically possible. I think that you can have all of that back if allies were ballsy enough to supply Ukraine with what they needed at the right time and allow them to use that. Alas, that doesn't seem to have been the case. It's interesting. I was reading an account that insiders in the Zelensky government have been really freaking frustrated recently at the paralysis from the Biden administration concerning not wanting to do anything that involves any form of escalation. And I guess the only hope with the Trump administration, if they do anything positive for Ukraine, that they'll be just a bit more confident that that wouldn't happen, that they'll be the ones that, with all the bravado, going, right, this is Trump now, screw you can do what we say type thing. Now, Trump is beholden to strongmen and dictators, so he loves himself a bit of Putin, and that's your problem there. But in another universe, you could have a Trump that goes, all right, I'm taking over, I'm not really bothered about this area, but I don't want to lose or be seen to lose, or the US be seen to be weak. So, because that's a reflection of me, I don't want to be seen to be weak. So, screw you. We're going to do this, that, blah, blah, blah. And that could be the only kind of positive outcome you can envisage from a Trumpian approach. Yeah, we'll see, I guess. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care. Thank you for watching, and I'll speak to you soon.